She didn't make a sound, not a growl, not a hiss, just sat there in the farthest corner of the enclosure, her back to the world. The shelter was quiet that morning. A soft overcast blanketed the trees outside, and somewhere in the distance a woodpecker tapped against old bark. Inside the hall smelled faintly of straw disinfectant and thyme. Volunteers moved between kennels, checking water bowls, clearing old bedding, scribbling notes on clipboards. Each animal had a name, a tag, a backstory written in magic marker on plastic placards. Except for the one in kennel number 47. She didn't have a name, just a number, and she wasn't like the others. Most of the creatures in this small wildlife rescue just north of Blue Ridge, Georgia, were either too young to survive in the wild or too injured to return. A deer fawn with a splint on its hind leg, a squirrel who'd lost part of its tail, 2 opossums who'd been orphaned after their mother was hit on a back road. People loved those animals. There was something reassuring about them, vulnerable but soft, familiar. But the bobcat in number 47 didn't inspire that kind of sympathy. Her coat was a little too matted, her gaze a little too still. She didn't cry out when you walked past, didn't perk her ears when someone entered the room. She just stayed, still, watchful. For weeks, nobody touched her file. It wasn't fear exactly, it was uncertainty. Most people don't know this, but bobcats don't meow like house cats. They don't purr the same way either. They have their own sounds, throatier, wilder. But this one, she made none of them. She didn't threaten, but she didn't trust. One intern once said, "She looks like she's been through something, but forgot how to ask for help." And maybe that was true. She had a small scar under one eye, half an ear missing, and a limp in her back leg that no vet had yet explained. Not fully. They guessed it was from a trap or a fall. Maybe a vehicle strike in the woods, but no one knew for sure. All they knew was she didn't resist. She didn't react. She simply waited. Most visitors, especially families, skipped past her kennel. Children wanted to see the cute animals, the playful ones, the kind that nuzzled up to the glass or chased a ball of feathers. But kennel number 47 had no movement. A quiet shadow pressed against the back wall. One woman muttered under her breath, "That's not safe to keep around kids." Another said, "I don't know why they try to rescue animals like that. They don't belong in places like this." She was wild, they said, as if that made her less worth saving. But what people didn't see, what they didn't stay long enough to notice, was how she tilted her head ever so slightly toward the doorway when someone entered. How even in her stillness she tracked every movement in the room. How she breathed with this slow, deliberate rhythm, as if she was still deciding whether or not she wanted to stay alive. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't docile. She was suspended somewhere in between. Her intake form had little information, found by a ranger near a back road just outside Copper Hill, Tennessee. No chip, no collar, no history. And so she was written off, labeled not suitable for rehabilitation. Translation: she'll be transferred or sedated until long-term care can be arranged. But everyone knew what that usually meant. One morning, it rained. Not hard, just enough to soften the sky and quiet the woods. Only one visitor came that day. He wore a worn canvas jacket and boots that left a little trail of red clay at the entrance. His name was Marcus Everett, a quiet man local. He didn't ask for a tour, just nodded politely and walked the line of enclosures by himself. He stopped for the squirrels, for the fawns, spoke gently to a raccoon who batted at his reflection. But he didn't stop moving, not until he reached the far wall, and there she was, pressed low in the corner, still facing away. He stood there, silent, one hand resting on the metal bar. No movement, no noise, just stillness meeting stillness. 1 minute passed, then another, and then something changed. The bobcat slowly turned her head. She didn't blink, didn't hiss, but she looked at him. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. No music, no dramatic lighting, just a pause, a breath held in time. And in that moment, Marcus saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Not beauty, not fear, Just a kind of recognition, the kind that doesn't need words. She didn't approach. He didn't speak. But something passed between them. Something real. And maybe it's not something you can explain to people who haven't stood in front of something broken and still seen a glimmer. But for Marcus, who'd spent years avoiding eye contact with his own grief, this felt familiar. Not in a painful way, not anymore. Just honest. He returned the next day. Didn't say much, just asked, "Do you have a name for her?" The shelter volunteer shrugged. "No, we never got around to naming her." Marcus nodded, looked down at the paperwork, looked back at the cage, and softly said, "Her name's Willa." Sometimes the smallest gesture, a name, a look, a presence can be more powerful than any grand rescue. Not because it fixes something, but because it sees something. And in a world that's so quick to decide what's broken beyond repair, to look at something frightened and still say you're not too far gone, that matters more than we know. Bobcats, like people, are misunderstood. They're seen as dangerous, isolated, unapproachable. But really, they're solitary because they're designed that way. They don't form packs, but that doesn't mean they don't feel. Willa wasn't aggressive. She was overwhelmed. She wasn't meant to be anyone's pet, but that didn't mean she didn't need peace. And perhaps what she needed most was to be near someone who didn't need anything from her. Just someone who could sit quietly and stay. If you've ever felt passed over, unseen, or like the world only wanted the friendlier version of you, you might understand Willa more than you think. You don't have to say anything. Just stay with us. There's more to her story. Marcus didn't walk in that day to save anyone. But the next morning, as the rain cleared and the sky turned pale blue over the treetops, he returned with an old crate in the bed of his truck. Not because he wanted to change her life, but because in some quiet part of him, he knew she might change his. And that's where their road begins. He didn't need a companion. He didn't want a pet. And if you'd asked him that morning why he turned down County Road 11 instead of heading home, he wouldn't have had an answer. Marcus Everett wasn't a man drawn to causes. He'd once been, years ago, a fire lookout up in the Smokies back when he could still sleep through the night and the world hadn't unraveled underneath him. But now, he lived on the edge of things, quiet, private, and far enough from town that no one came knocking unless they meant to. His days were simple. He walked the trails near his cabin with a thermos of coffee in one hand and a walking stick in the other. He read old trail reports like bedtime stories. He tended a patch of herbs behind the porch, not for cooking really, just for the smell. He'd never said it out loud, but the loneliness didn't bother him much. What did bother him, what still scratched at his ribs on cold nights, was the sound of a door closing and no one on the other side to miss him. It had been 5 years since the accident. That's how everyone referred to it. The accident. His daughter Willa had just turned 20. A slippery road, a wrong turn, and too much rain. No one was at fault. That's what the report said. But the absence it left was total. Since then, Marcus had done what many do when life breaks wide open. He retreated, moved deeper into the woods, answered fewer calls. He gave away her dog, stopped celebrating birthdays, started boiling his coffee instead of brewing it because some things just didn't feel worth setting up anymore. So when he stepped into the wildlife rescue that Tuesday, it wasn't part of a plan. He wasn't looking for anything. He wasn't trying to feel something. He just turned in, parked, walked in like he was walking into a memory, and found her. A frightened bobcat silent in a shelter corner. The first thing he saw wasn't her scars, it was her stillness, the kind he understood. He didn't take her home that day. Marcus Everett wasn't impulsive. He didn't buy things he didn't need, didn't speak when silence would do. But that night, sitting in his old recliner with the lights off and the fireplace crackling low, he thought about her eyes, how they didn't ask for help, didn't ask for anything. They just were. There's a kind of recognition between the broken things in this world. Not sympathy, not pity. Something else. Something more like resonance. The next morning he went back. He filled out the paperwork with deliberate strokes of the pen, When they asked for a name, he said, "Willa." He didn't explain it, and no one asked. They helped him load her into a modified crate. She didn't growl, didn't fight, just watched. One of the volunteers said, "Most bobcats don't handle captivity well. You know that, right?" He nodded. "That's not why I'm taking her." The road home curved gently through the forest. Yellow leaves spilled across the asphalt, and light filtered in patches through the canopy above. Marcus drove with the windows slightly cracked. Let the wind speak instead of music. Willa didn't make a sound the whole way. Back at the cabin, he opened the passenger door and waited. It took her a few minutes, but eventually she stepped out. Not cautiously, not with fear, just slowly, as if she'd done this before. He didn't have a pen or a kennel or any of the things people said you needed. What he had was space, quiet, time. He let her roam the edge of the porch where the light touched the wooden steps. She sniffed the wind, pressed her front paw into a bed of pine needles, stopped, then laid down. That was it. That was her claiming the space. That evening, Marcus sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, one of the few rituals he kept. Willa lay 4 feet away, not curled, not alert, just present. He didn't speak to her, didn't try to pet her, just let her be, let her own her silence the way he owned his. Later that week, a neighbor passed by, the kind who drove too fast for gravel roads and always waved from behind a windshield instead of a front door. He spotted Willa and frowned. "Is that a bobcat? You sure that's safe?" Marcus just nodded. "She hasn't given me any reason to think otherwise." The man chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. But Marcus wasn't joking. Some things aren't about control. They're about coexistence. And Willa, in her quiet, deliberate way, was proving that every day. Healing doesn't always come in the form of a breakthrough. Sometimes it's in the quiet routine of watching the same animal sleep beside the same chair every afternoon. It's in boiling water for tea because you know you'll need warmth in your hands as the sun dips low. It's in not having to speak because someone or something already understands the silence. Willa didn't need to be tamed, and Marcus didn't need to be saved. But somehow, by simply sharing space, they began to shift. Not in any grand way, but in the little things. The way he left the door, cracked now. The way she came closer to the porch railing each night. The way his breathing slowed when he watched her. We often think rescue is about swooping in, lifting up, making big declarations. But more often, it's just staying, not turning away, not flinching when something wild and unfamiliar looks back at you. Animals like Willa wildcats especially aren't meant to be owned, but they can be known, and sometimes being known is the thing that saves us. Marcus kept a small notebook beside his bed. He hadn't written in it for years, but a few nights after Willa arrived, he picked it up again. And on a page near the back, he scribbled just one sentence: "She didn't ask to be rescued." And maybe I didn't either, but here we are. If you've ever been through something and didn't have the words to explain it, if you've ever felt like the quietest part of you was the part that most needed to be seen, you're not alone. There are others out there, human and animal, sitting, waiting, watching. Sometimes all we can do is show up anyway. Over the next few days, Marcus and Willa found a rhythm. Not quite routine, not yet trust, but rhythm. She began to linger longer by the steps. He began to speak softly when he passed her. The air between them changed, less distance, more breath. And then one morning, something unexpected happened. Willa stood at the screen door, not scratching, not meowing, just waiting. And Marcus, he opened it. Sometimes healing doesn't look like progress. It looks like two quiet souls sharing space, one too afraid to move, the other too tired to ask for more. The first few days after Willa came home were almost soundless. Not in a heavy way, not uncomfortable. Just quiet like the woods before dawn, when everything is holding its breath, waiting to see if the light will come back again. Marcus had forgotten how full silence could be. How it stretched between moments like a bridge instead of a wall. He didn't fill it with words. He didn't need to. Because Willa didn't ask for conversation. She only asked for time. Marcus lived in an old cabin tucked into the ridge where the forest leaned close and the air carried the smell of pine and wet bark. The front porch creaked when he stepped out each morning, and the screen door moaned the same way it had for years. The floorboards sagged just enough to tell stories of everything that had passed through. This was the world Willa walked into, simple, steady, unhurried. At first, she didn't wander far from the doorway. She'd sit just outside, the frame nose lifted toward the wind ears, twitching like antennae, catching every sound in the valley. A crow. A falling acorn. The low hum of a truck somewhere down the road. She didn't flinch, she just listened, and Marcus found himself doing the same. He set out an old blanket by the porch steps, a tin bowl of water, and a few pieces of venison he'd been saving in the freezer. He wasn't sure what bobcats preferred to eat. He wasn't sure about anything, really. But that first night he noticed something small. The meat was gone. The water bowl was half empty, and the blanket had been turned as if someone or something had been lying there. There's a saying among wildlife rescuers, progress doesn't always happen where you can see it. It happens in the shift of posture, in the way a frightened animal chooses not to run. And for Willa, it was in the way she started sleeping closer to the door each night. Still outside, still her choice, but closer. By the end of that first week, Marcus stopped shutting the door completely. He'd leave it cracked just enough for air to pass through. And in the early morning, before the coffee boiled, before the day decided what kind of day it was going to be, he'd hear it. The soft click of paws on wood. Not rushing, not sneaking, just moving, and by the time he turned around, she'd already be gone again. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the ridge, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Heavy rain, sudden wind thunder that shakes the windows. Marcus sat by the fire with a book open on his lap, pretending to read. He wasn't worried about the trees or the roof. He was thinking of Willa. She'd been near the edge of the yard when the storm came in. He told himself she'd find shelter, that animals like her always know what to do. Still, when lightning split the sky, he caught himself glancing toward the door, and there she was, soaked to the bone, eyes fixed on him through the screen door. Neither moved for a moment. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. Marcus reached over and unlatched the door. Didn't open it, just let it swing an inch. It was enough. Willa stepped inside. Not cautiously, more like she was accepting an invitation she'd already considered. She crossed the wooden floor, left a trail of small, muddy prints, and lay down near the hearth, close enough to feel the warmth, but far enough to keep her pride. Marcus turned a page he hadn't read. He didn't say a word. And that night, they both slept better than they had in years. When people talk about animal rescue, they often focus on the moment of saving, the cage opening, the embrace, the joy. But sometimes the real rescue comes later, in the small, invisible moments that happen after the adrenaline fades. The moments where trust isn't a dramatic leap, it's a quiet lean. A glance. A shared silence. A heartbeat that slows because it's no longer alone. Willa didn't transform overnight. She didn't become tame or playful. She was still wild. But wild doesn't mean unreachable. Wild can mean honest. And that was what Marcus was learning every time she stepped a little closer, without fear. Bobcats are solitary by nature. They roam miles of forest without needing companionship. Yet science tells us even wild creatures respond to consistency, the steady rhythm of a voice, the sound of footsteps that never rush. That's how trust begins, not with training, but with presence. Maybe people aren't that different. We heal the same way, slowly, quietly, when someone simply stays. And Marcus. He stayed. Every morning he'd refill the bowl. Every evening he'd sit on the porch, the steam from his coffee rising like prayer. Sometimes he'd speak softly, not to be heard, but to keep the air kind. Things like, "You're all right, girl," or "You can rest if you want." Nothing more, nothing less. And over time, he began to notice her listening. Not for the words, for the tone, the way we all do when the language itself isn't what matters. One evening, as the light faded, Marcus dozed off in his chair by the fire. When he woke, he felt a warmth near his boots. Willa was lying there, her side rising and falling, eyes closed, tail flicking slowly in sleep. He didn't move, didn't dare. He just watched her breathe. That rhythm, steady, deep, alive, was more comforting than any sound he could remember. It filled the cabin like a heartbeat that had been missing for too long. The next morning, she was gone. Back outside, back to her distance, but the blanket was warm. That was enough. Some people heal by talking, others by creating. And some, like Marcus, like Willa, heal by enduring together. Not fixing, not rescuing, just existing side by side until the ache becomes part of the rhythm of living. That's the kind of bond no one sees coming. It sneaks up like sunrise through fog, quiet, inevitable, and gentle enough not to startle. If you've ever shared your home or even a moment with an animal who didn't quite trust you yet, you know what it's like to wait for stillness to turn into peace. It's not about ownership, it's about understanding. So take a moment tonight. Step outside, listen to the wind. Let something wild remind you you're still connected. Even in silence, we're not alone. As the weeks passed, something began to shift. Willa's limp grew lighter. Her coat shone again. She'd follow the edge of the yard, like she was patrolling something invisible. But one afternoon, Marcus noticed a pattern in her movements, too precise, too deliberate to be random. Every turn, every pause, as if she were following a memory. And that was when a new presence entered their quiet life. An old woman with paint-stained hands and a past as tangled as the woods around them. Her name was Marjorie, and she was about to tell Marcus something he didn't expect. She lived just past the tree line where the mailbox leaned and the wind carried stories in the moss. People in town called her odd. Marcus just called her necessary. Marjorie hadn't set foot in town in over 2 years. Not since the day they closed the small conservation office she once volunteered at. Not since the traffic doubled, the chain store opened, and the forest line got pushed back a little more each season. She preferred the quiet now. Preferred the company of owls, the rhythm of brush on canvas, and the whisper of old memories through pines. Marcus first met her 15 years ago. Back when he still worked fire watch. Back when his hands were calloused from ropes and ash. She'd invited him in for coffee once during a storm. The kind of storm that makes the roads disappear. Her cabin smelled of cedar and turpentine. Books stacked in small towers. Maps pinned to the walls like constellations. They weren't friends exactly, but some people don't need labels. They were two souls built for stillness, two minds shaped by trees and time. He hadn't spoken to her since Willa arrived. Not until that afternoon when Willa stopped just shy of the property, edge ears, pricked body rigid, staring down a direction Marcus couldn't see. It wasn't a bird or a squirrel this time. She stayed there a full 5 minutes, still as a stone. And then slowly she turned, began walking. Not toward the woods, but into them. Marcus followed. No leash, no command, just a quiet trust. And 30 minutes later, they arrived at Marjorie's porch. She was painting. A fox mid-run against a wash of blue and rust-colored trees. The details didn't matter as much as the movement. Willa didn't make a sound. She just sat at the foot of the steps, watching. And Marjorie. She lowered her brush like she'd been expecting them. "You finally brought her," she said. "Not what is that or why is she here, but you brought her." Marcus didn't answer right away. He didn't know what answer to give. Willa looked up at Marjorie, and Marjorie's eyes softened, not with surprise, but recognition. "She's not just wild," Marjorie murmured. "She's trained." Marjorie had seen things. Not all of them she'd asked to see. Before the art, before the solitude, she'd been a field biologist in Utah. Back when private research facilities were experimenting with animal cognition, environmental behavior, and though few dared say it aloud, tactical adaptation. Marcus had heard bits and pieces over the years. Projects that didn't show up on any public conservation reports. Contracts with long names and longer silences. Most people forgot. Or wanted to. But Marjorie didn't. She crouched down slowly, her joints cracking like old floorboards. And Willa didn't move, didn't flinch. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something not meant for human language. "I knew one like her once," Marjorie said. "Long time ago. She was taken in young, raised a lot like a soldier. Never really got the chance to just be." She pointed to the slight indentation at the back of Willa's neck. "You feel that?" she asked. Marcus nodded. He'd noticed it too. "It's a subdermal chip," Marjorie said quietly. "Not the kind vets use?" She went inside and came back with a small handheld scanner. Old, scratched, but still humming. "Found it at an estate sale," she said with a half smile. "Most people don't even know what these are." Willa stayed still. Didn't growl. Just sat. Marjorie moved slowly, pressed the scanner gently near the back of Willa's neck. A faint beep. The numbers flashed nothing familiar. No pet registry, no shelter system, but a code, a sequence. Precise. She scribbled it down. "I'll reach out to someone I trust," she said. "Might take a few days." Marcus didn't ask what kind of someone. He just nodded. Because whatever Willa's past was, it had left scars deeper than the ones you could see. We carry what we don't speak of. In the limp that never quite heals, in the way we startle at nothing, in the silence that feels safer than the truth. Willa wasn't just a bobcat. She was a story half buried, and stories like that don't stay buried forever. Not when someone finally says, "I see you. You don't have to hide here anymore." That afternoon, they stayed longer than planned. Marjorie made a pot of weak black tea and they sat on mismatched chairs beneath the rustling shade. Willa circled the edge of the porch 3 times, then lay near the stairs, head resting on her paws. "I don't know what she's been through," Marcus said, "but I don't think it's over yet." Marjorie nodded slowly. "It never really is," she said. "But you're not alone anymore. Neither is she. We like to think of rescue as a one-way street. The human saves the animal. The strong saves the weak. But sometimes it's the animal that teaches us how to return to ourselves. By watching, by waiting, by reminding us that safety isn't the same as control. It's earned breath by breath, step by quiet step. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the branches, Willa stood, stretched, and without prompting, walked down the path home. Marcus followed, and Marjorie, still on the porch, raised her mug in a quiet farewell. Not goodbye, just until next time. If you've ever met someone who saw through the armor, who looked past your silence and still chose to stay, maybe you understand what Willa felt that day. We all need someone like Marjorie, and maybe sometimes we're meant to be that person for someone else. That night, Marcus sat by the fire. The scanner rested on the table beside him. He hadn't looked up the code yet. He wasn't sure he wanted to. But Willa was sleeping by the window. For the first time, her body stretched out fully unguarded. And in that moment, he knew. Whatever her past was, it wasn't just history. It was reaching forward, calling, and soon he'd have to answer. Names have gravity. The right one doesn't just describe something. It remembers it. The name came before the dream. That part Marcus was sure of. He'd spoken it softly, almost without realizing. Willa. He'd said it in the hallway one evening, looking at the bobcat curled near the fireplace. The fire had burned low. The room was nearly dark, and something about the way she was lying, ears slightly turned, body resting but never fully surrendered, reminded him of the girl who used to fall asleep on the rug with a flashlight in one hand and a trail of books around her. His daughter, also Willa. He hadn't said her name out loud in years. At first it had been too painful, then too distant. Grief does that. Turns people into shadows and memories into sharp corners. But that night, as the fire cracked and the wind brushed the windows, the name slipped past his lips like a leaf caught on a breeze. And the bobcat lifted her head. Didn't move, didn't react, just listened, as if the name belonged to her too. Marcus didn't tell anyone about the dream the next morning. He barely told himself. It had been so vivid, He was standing by the edge of a wide field, dawn curling in low around his boots. His daughter stood beside him, older than he remembered, calmer somehow. Her hair pulled back, hands tucked in her jacket pockets, and beside her, a bobcat. Not Willa, as she was now scarred, alert, wild, but Willa as she might have been, young, lithe, unburdened. The three of them stood in silence, watching something in the distance he couldn't quite make out. Then his daughter turned to him and said, "You didn't find her. She remembered you." He woke before he could respond. Some dreams are echoes, others messages. This one felt like both. And that morning, Marcus pulled an old box from the back of his closet, one he hadn't touched in nearly 5 years. Inside, a folded wool scarf with grass still stuck in the threads. A photo of Willa as a child holding a stuffed bobcat at the zoo, eyes full of wonder. A drawing she'd made once, a cabin with 2 figures on the porch, her and a 4-legged shape she'd called the forest cat. He stared at that drawing for a long time. Then he went outside. Willa the bobcat was sitting at the edge of the garden, eyes on the woods. Marcus knelt beside her. His knees ached, his hands shook, but his voice was steady. "Hey, Willa." And she turned. Example. Rooted in event. That same afternoon, Marjorie called. Her voice was quieter than usual. "I found something," she said. Marcus met her at the edge of her land where the trees thinned and the light slanted gold. She handed him a second photograph, sharper than the last, taken from a slightly higher angle like surveillance. The bobcat in the photo was unmistakable. Same muzzle pattern, same notched ear. And the man beside her, Logan Price, according to the files, was kneeling, his hand resting near her shoulder. But what struck Marcus most wasn't the photo itself. It was what was written on the back, in black ink almost too faint to read. "Not every one of them gets to come back." He read it twice, then again, and something inside him twisted. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. That night, as the sky darkened and the trees swayed like old storytellers in the wind, Marcus sat beside the fireplace with the photo in his lap. Willa was nearby, her eyes half closed. He didn't speak, but he felt her listening, as if she knew the photo mattered, as if she'd seen it or something like it in another life. There's a quiet kind of grief that comes when you realize someone once had a whole story and the world chose to forget it. Willa hadn't just wandered into that shelter years later. She'd survived something, endured silence, carried the memory of a hand once placed near her shoulder, a voice once trusted. And somehow, through that fog, she'd found her way back to being seen. Names carry more than memory. They're anchors, maps, small acts of defiance against forgetting. When Marcus named the bobcat Willa, he didn't mean to resurrect the past. But in doing so, he created space for something new. A bridge between what was lost and what might still be found. In the days that followed, Marcus noticed small changes. Willa no longer froze at distant sounds. She walked a little farther from the house each morning, but returned by sunset always to the same spot near the porch. She began to sleep with her body stretched fully, not curled tight like before. And one afternoon, when Marcus was weeding the back garden, he looked up to find her lying in the sunlight, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the breeze. She wasn't guarding, she wasn't hiding. She was resting, really resting. He took out his journal that night, wrote just 3 lines. The name fits her. Maybe it always did. Maybe it was hers before I ever knew it. If you've ever whispered a name into the dark, hoping something or someone still hears it, know this. Some names echo longer than we think, and sometimes the act of remembering becomes the act of healing. But peace, however quiet, doesn't always last. Not when someone somewhere is still watching. A few mornings later, Marcus opened his door to find something half hidden beneath the welcome mat. A white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Inside the photo again, but this time sharper, closer, and with it, a message scrawled in ink. "We remember her too." His hands trembled as he folded it shut. And for the first time in weeks, Willa didn't sit by the porch that night. She stood, guarding. They didn't come with sirens or uniforms. They came in plain clothes in a black sedan that rolled slow past the end of the lane, like a shadow deciding whether to step into the light. The envelope should have been an oddity Marcus could ignore. A photograph left on his porch unsigned, saying in a few blunt words, "We remember her too." Instead, it opened a door he had been pretending was closed. That same afternoon, two men in nondescript jackets parked at the edge of Marcus's property and sat engine idling with their heads turned toward the cabin. No lights, no hurry, just watching. It was the kind of attention that sits on a doorstep the way cold does, slow, invasive, and impossible to ignore. Willa noticed before Marcus did. She padded to the window, ears forward, body tight as a drawn bow. Her pupils narrowed. She didn't hiss, she didn't yowl, she simply watched. Marcus stepped outside, coffee forgotten on the table. The men in the car didn't move. They watched the line of trees, the porch, the stretch of road that led to town. Not obvious, not threatening in a way that's easy to name. Just there. Present, calculating. Some threats arrive loudly, some arrive as a weight on the landscape. When organizations or people used to secrecy want something left buried, they don't always bring orders or men in uniform. They test the edges first. They see who notices and who looks away. They send a photograph to remind you that your curiosity is seen. They sit in cars to remind you that eyes can follow without speaking. Marcus had seen a few kinds of danger before. Not in uniform, but in the way storms gather, in the way fires change direction. This felt similar, an environmental shift, the kind that alters the habits of everything around it. He watched the car as if watching a storm roll in. He felt the old training in his bones observe, don't announce catalog, what changes. That night, Marcus didn't sleep well. He left the porch light on, not because he thought someone would step forward, but because making light felt like a small act of defiance. Willa stayed near the door, alert enough that her breath hitched with every distant sound. At dawn, a knock came at the door. Marcus opened it to find the town sheriff, plain face-worn badge, standing there with his hat in his hand. "Saw the sedan last night," the sheriff said. "We checked the plates. Nothing registered." "That's not unusual," Marcus replied, voice steady. "They left a photo." He handed it over. The sheriff studied it, then looked at Marcus with a softness that surprised him. "If anyone's watching, we'll keep an eye. But you keep an eye too. Don't let them push you." After the sheriff left, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and stared at the photograph again. He thought of Logan Price, the name from Marjorie's file, and the way the man had knelt beside a younger bobcat in that archive photo. He thought of the phrase scrawled on the back, "Not every one of them gets to come back." He thought of how Willa's body tensed at the sight of the sedan. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He called Ben. Not just to read codes anymore, but to ask a question he'd been avoiding. "If someone wants to find that facility's trail," he said, "what do they usually do?" Ben's answer was blunt. "They intimidate first. They gauge. If you push back, they'll try to make you look small. If you retreat, they'll move on." That night, Marcus cleared a place on the porch with a chair and a thermos. He sat there when the light faded. Willa at his feet, not sleeping but breathing in the same rhythm as him. He watched the road. He listened for tires. He kept his shoulders loose, his hands empty, his feet steady. The presence of the sedan changed how Marcus felt about the quiet he'd been cultivating. Silence was no longer a refuge. It was a risk. The same calm that had healed him now made him vulnerable to being overlooked when he needed to be seen. There's a particular ache to discovering you're not only guarding your own grief, but someone else's secret too. That weight is distinct from the grief itself, heavier because it's shared, sharper because it carries other people's momentum. Marcus had chosen to shelter a frightened bobcat. That choice now pulled him inside a story that was bigger than his porch and older than his loss. It demanded something else, a stance. Not aggression, not bravado, just clarity about what he would and wouldn't allow. Threats like this ask for a response that's both practical and humane. You can't meet secrecy with secrecy. You meet it with presence, with community, with light. So Marcus began to bring people in quietly. He wrote under a pseudonym on a regional wildlife forum about his discovery and included a blurred photo. He asked for help identifying the chip code while leaving out specifics that might endanger the animal or anyone else. Messages came not many, but steady. A retired vet from a nearby county offered to run diagnostics without involving state registries. A woman who volunteered at a wildlife sanctuary 3 hours away offered space if needed. A veteran sent a short note. "If you ever need someone to watch the road, I can do a rotation." People he had never met before stepped forward in small, practical ways. Not everyone sent threats. Not everyone wanted to profit. Some just wanted to bear witness. That Marcus realized was the answer to secrecy: build a net. Not of paper or law, but of neighbors, people who would look and remember and refuse to let the story vanish. One afternoon, a neighbor named Eli, who ran a towing service and had hands like planks, pulled up with 2 chairs and a thermos. He sat by the end of the driveway like someone placing a sentinel. They didn't talk much. They watched the road. They laughed softly about old radio signals and bad coffee. It was ordinary company. It felt like armor. On the 3rd day, the black sedan returned. This time it paused its occupants, watching Marcus's porch with a little more caution. Eli waved without standing up. The car hesitated, then drove on. Not a victory, not a showdown, but a small recalibration, a message that the house was watched not by one man, but a few. The kind of notice that secrecy doesn't like. Sometimes courage looks like a person sitting in a rusted chair at the end of a lane. Sometimes it looks like a note in a forum. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor driving a truck down at dusk. Courage isn't always dramatic. Often it's ordinary and slow. It's small decisions, over days. Decisions to keep a light on, to answer a knock, to take a photo and not hand it to the first person who asks. Willa continued to do what she'd always done: observe the world, hold herself ready. Marcus continued to do what he hadn't thought he would let others in. He slept better. Not because the danger had passed, but because the weight had been spread. If you're listening and you've ever been the quiet person keeping watch over a yard, over a friend, over a memory, know this: you don't have to do it alone. A small act of company can change everything. If you've ever sat with someone in silence, share that memory below. It matters more than you might think. A new rhythm settled in, people checking in, a rotation of eyes on the road, Willa's patrols lengthening as she grew stronger. But the photograph's message hadn't been a simple warning. It was a thread, a connection, a promise that someone somewhere still remembered what had been done. That promise would come with consequences and with possibilities. It would draw attention from places Marcus hadn't expected and from those he hadn't known to trust. And when the storm finally moved through both the weather and the other kind, what they all found waiting wasn't just danger. It was a chance to build something new out of what had been broken. Some stories don't end. They unfold into something larger, not a rescue, but a return. Not a goodbye, but a gate opening. Months passed. The black sedan never returned. Or maybe it did, but no one saw it stop again. By then, the road had changed. So had the cabin. And so had Willa. She still walked the edge of the clearing each morning, tracing invisible paths through the trees like an old memory reactivated. But now she didn't pace to scan. She wandered to feel. There was calm in her movements, weight in her stillness. Some days she'd lie under the sun near the rosemary Marcus planted just for her. He'd kneel to weed or water, and she'd stay beside him, not watching, not guarding, just near. Close. When an animal like Willa is rescued, especially one shaped by a life of trauma, confusion, and human interference, the goal isn't to make her normal. That word doesn't belong in wild animal rescue. The goal is to offer space, choice, a place where instinct and healing can coexist. That's what Marcus and the small group of neighbors created. Not a sanctuary in the official sense, no signs, no admission, no fences that didn't belong to the landscape. Just a stretch of forest behind the cabin marked by a handmade arch carved from weathered oak. Willa's Gate. At the entrance, a stone with one word etched into it: still, because that was what Willa had taught them. That stillness could be sacred. that it could be enough. The idea for the gate came after a young woman named Caroline showed up one morning. She was quite nervous. Her arms were marked with healed cuts, and her voice trembled as she asked if this was the place where the bobcat had come back. Marcus wasn't sure what she meant by come back, but she held out a printout of a forum thread, one of the posts Marcus had made anonymously long ago. Caroline had read it during a night she couldn't sleep. She said it reminded her of something of someone of herself. He invited her to sit on the porch. Willa emerged from the brush like a whisper, walked to the bottom step, and met Caroline's gaze. No tricks, no commands, just presence. The girl cried quietly. She said, "I didn't know I needed to see something this still." That afternoon they built the gate. No announcement, no ceremony. Just a quiet marker that something had shifted. And within weeks, others came. Not many, just enough. An older couple who had lost their son in Afghanistan. A teacher who used to take in stray cats but couldn't anymore because her lungs had weakened. A man who hadn't spoken to anyone in town since his wife passed 2 winters ago. They came, they sat, they listened. Not to sermons or speeches, to wind, to birds, to silence. And to Willa, who stayed at the edges, always near, never tamed, just real. We often imagine rescue as a single heroic act. A hand reaching into a cage, a voice calling a name, a door swinging open. But most rescues aren't like that. They're slower, quieter. They happen in the way someone refills a bowl every morning without expecting thanks. In the way a person leaves the door open not to chase but to invite. In the way a community slowly forms around a being who never asked to be seen but who reminded them what it means to care without condition. That's the heart of true animal rescue. Not saving something wild to make it behave, but offering it enough peace that it no longer has to defend its life at every moment. Wild animal shelters are often misunderstood. People think of baby bobcats curled up like kittens or viral videos of animals cuddling humans like long-lost friends. But the real work is slower, more sacred. It's watching a bobcat twitch in her sleep and realizing she's dreaming without fear. It's planting herbs that attract butterflies because the land deserves joy again. It's knowing that big cats like Willa aren't meant to entertain, they're meant to exist. That understanding changes people. Marcus saw it happen over and over again. Each time someone visited the gate, they arrived expecting answers, some form of closure, but they left with something softer. Not clarity, but companionship. Not proof, but presence. They didn't find healing from Willa. They found it alongside her. One evening, as the fire crackled and dusk painted gold over the tree line, Willa came to the porch and rested her head on Marcus's boot. He didn't move, just breathed. That same night, he wrote one final entry in the notebook. She saved herself. I just made sure she had somewhere to land. The next morning, Marcus hung a small wooden sign at the edge of the gate. It read, "Come sit. No need to speak. Just be." Since then, visitors still come. Quiet ones, gentle ones. Sometimes they bring blankets, sometimes just questions they never say out loud. And sometimes Willa appears, not because she's called, but because she wants to. And when she does, she stands still in the clearing, fur brushed by wind eyes, calm, body poised. No growl, no fear, just a presence so complete it feels like grace. If you've followed this story until now, thank you, not just for watching, but for staying. Because this wasn't a story about taming a wild creature. It was about letting one remain wild and finding connection in that choice. Maybe there's a part of you that recognizes Willa, the part that's tired of performing, of hiding, of guarding. Maybe what you need most right now is stillness. A gate. A place to remember that you don't have to earn rest. You just have to let it come. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred something gentle or reminded you of someone you miss, take a breath. And when you're ready, subscribe to this channel. Because there are more stories like this waiting about wild cats and quiet men, and the healing that can happen between species when we slow down long enough to listen. You can also click like to help this video find someone else who needs stillness. And if you feel moved, consider tapping super thanks or visiting the donation link in the description. Your gift helps support real-life wildlife rescue bobcats like Willa animals caught in confusion and fear who just need someone to stay. Not fix, not claim, just be there. From all of us here, thank you for seeing her and for remembering that wild still matters.